Okay, IED. This is going to be activity 1.3.3, part 2. In part 1, we went through the beginning of making a sketch and applying some constraints to said sketch, and then we did a little bit of extrusion. Our shape looked like some weird misshapen state, and we just kind of left it at that. So we made a concave polygon, we extruded it, and it was all good. Now, we're actually going to go through a little bit of applying constraints. So in my class, I'm considering this part 2 of the um, activity. So here we go. Um, it begins by talking about how to make automatic constraints, and a CAD program can be used to create constraints on sketches, and those constraints are usually made to either smooth the design process or make the design look cleaner or more efficient, or an ability to help you keep things equal to each other even if you don't automatically make them equal to each other. So here we go. A couple of sentences that are kind of important, like sometimes you don't even realize that constraints are being applied. That second sentence, that is totally true in any 3D modeling software like Onshape or Inventor or basically anyone that I've seen so far. It'll apply constraints even if you're not really noticing that it is applying constraints. And I'll try to point those out as we continue to go through this. So y'all read through these first two paragraphs nice and slow. Make sure you get a good understanding of it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start with number 9, and we're going to work our way down to a stoppable position. So it says start a new design with the project you created in activity 1.2.5, name and save the design. Okay, so I don't know. I'm just going to create I've got a design. I've called it a constraint practice. So I'm going to go ahead and use that file. I'm going to move this over so that we can actually get some Onshape going on here. And I'm just going to create a new document. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to go create and new part studio. That'll make a new part for me. And then we're going to be able to name it. So down here in the bottom tab, we can name it. I'm going to go ahead and name this constraint practice part 2. Apparently cannot spell constraint. There we go. Constraint practice part 2. All right. And let's see here. Create a sketch similar to the one shown. Use millimeters as the units for the sketch, but do not apply dimensional constraints. And the one that they want us to make, it looks like this. Okay, so this is a 10-sided concave polygon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it wants us to pay attention to the constraints that automatically get applied to this scenario. So, okay, that's fair enough. I'm going to click Sketch. I'm going to click Top so that we're going to go to the top view. And I'm going to click here. So we're going to make a sketch. And I want it to try to at least look like a 10-sided polygon. And I want it to at least kind of look like it goes halfway through the origin. Close enough. All right, I'm going to make it go up and then over and then 45 degrees ish. Boop. And then click, and then click, and then let's see. I know in Onshape you can kind of cheat and you can use, like you can always use points as reference points if you move around. So I can automatically just make sure and set that one like that. I can set this one like so. And I can just keep going. And I can always use these as references to kind of move it into position. That doesn't look terrible, but I automatically know that whenever I see it that all of these things aren't going to be perfect for each other. Like this length is definitely longer than this length. So all of these constraints that you can see, these little buttons that show up to the side whenever you move your mouse over the lines, these are automatic constraints that are put in place. The one with a line and the other line next to it and a dot, that's a coincident constraint. The line that goes up and down, that's a vertical. And I didn't put these constraints in, they just were automatically there as I was laying them out. Any horizontal line that you lay is normally going to automatically include the horizontal constraint. If you want that line to ever become not horizontal, you need to click on that constraint like that, and then actually hit the backspace button so that you can get rid of it or delete it. So you can see as you move the mouse along, you can see all of the different constraints that occur throughout this entire setup. Okay, and let's see here. Create a quick hand sketch to describe the constraints that were automatically applied. When two elements are controlled by a single constraint, somehow represent the dependencies on your sketch. So they actually want you to create a sketch on paper. Create a sketch on paper that kind of shows what those constraints are. So like you can just like write it down. You can be like these two are parallel to each other, or these constraints are vertical to each other. There's a lot of different kind of things that you can do. Okay. Um, you can also display to turn on all the constraints. So like for example, in sketch one right here, if you click this little box that says show constraints, you can see all of the constraints that happens inside this box. That gets a little crowded though, so I wouldn't recommend keeping that on because it kind of makes it hard to see. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to uncheck that so that we don't see it. And that's how you would do this in OnShape, by the way. Let's see here. Investigate how the constraints affect sketch behavior by selecting individual lines and points and dragging each using your mouse. Okay, so what you can do is you can see how these constraints relate to each other. You can click on individual parts of the lines and you can move them around. And since some parts are constrained to each other, like for example, these are the perpendicular constraint. So like if we were to extend these two lines out, they would be at a right angle to each other. And if you move them around, they always move to where they are perpendicular to each other, no matter what. Okay, so this kind of helps us with our design process. And if I move this one to the right, doesn't look like it's really constrained to anything. And this one moving to the left doesn't really look like it's constrained to anything. All right, so let's keep going. Remove a few constraints one at a time and observe how the sketch behavior changes when you drag sketch elements. I think the perpendicular one is a perfect one to kind of show here. So perpendicular is this boy right here. I'm going to backspace and get rid of it, or right click delete. I'm not doing a very good job here. There we go. Click on it, backspace. There it goes. So if I click on that, and now watch what happens. If I got rid of the perpendicular constraint, instead of those two lines moving at the same time, only one of the lines are moving. And that's because they're not constrained to each other anymore. They're not dependent on each other by some type of geometry. I'm going to go ahead and put that one back in there. But that's a good idea of how you can like get rid of some of them. And I highly recommend that you just play around with it, because the more you play around with it, the more it makes sense. I know it's kind of weird to say that, but it's totally true. The more you play around with these sketches, the more that it makes sense. If you are going to do this super small brain mode, you would just like make the sketch, look at it, and you're like, huh, well, I'm done. And then you would just turn it in, but you wouldn't have really learned anything. Um, you get more out of this activity by playing around with the sketch. Okay. Let's see here. I think the next thing that it says is turn to a partner and discuss any sketch behavior that surprised you during your investigation. If you identified surprising sketch behavior, try to find an explanation for why it did what it did. Sometimes it's going to do some really weird stuff. Step number 15, discard your previous sketch. Pfft, thanks. Now I made that for nothing. Tell you what, I'm not going to discard it. I'm just going to make a new. I'm just going to make a new part studio. Like I'm going to keep this one, and I'm going to just make a new one. I don't want to get rid of it completely. It seems kind of silly. I don't like to get rid of things when I have a digital library of stuff. Begin a new sketch to create a similar shape using lines and program suggested constraints. Don't worry about line length as you walk through the steps. You will place dimensional constraints later. Place a line on the x-axis, allowing software to suggest a horizontal constraint and automatically constrain the line. I kind of do that all the time anyway. Create a new line coincident with the left endpoint of the line perpendicular to the original file line per the image. Okay, so I think I get what's going on here. I'm going to click Sketch, and I'm going to click Top. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a line that goes across on the x-axis, okay? And then I'm going to make a line that goes straight up, and I'm going to make sure that these are perpendicular to each other. So if these are not, I'm looking at the constraints, and I don't see a perpendicular constraint. So I'm going to go ahead and add that one in. Down up here in this top right, you can click on this, and it gives you a whole lot of different types of constraints in this button right here. I'm looking for the perpendicular constraint. So I'm going to click on that one, and I'm going to click these two, and it looks like nothing happened. However, if you look at show constraints, you'll see that there is now a perpendicular constraint on these two lines. That means that these are always going to be at a right angle to each other, no matter what. And some people would say, well, yeah, this was vertical and this was horizontal, so wouldn't that mean that they're always perpendicular? And the answer is, yeah. I don't have a good answer for that. So, but it seems to make it, and it constrains it just fine. I'm just making extra sure, I suppose. Okay, so that would be the placement of the second line. For the third one, we're going to use a similar approach, and we're going to make a line. And it looks like we're making the exact same shape that we made last time. So I'm going to make sure that this perpendicular constraint does apply right here. So I'm going to click on the perpendicular, and then I'm going to click on the both of the lines. Click, click, and then it'll allow me to have a perpendicular constraint. Okay. Next in line is I'm going to click on this and make a diagonal line, and then I'm going to move up, I'm going to move over, then I'm going to move down. I'm doing a lot of steps at once here. I'm sorry. Um, and let's see here. It looks like we were supposed to add a perpendicular constraint with line 3. Okay, so I'm going to go perpendicular and I'm going to click on this vertical line and this horizontal line. And now these two should be always at right angles to each other. They shouldn't do anything weird. Okay, let's see. Line 6, avoid any automatic constraints by placing the line slightly off horizontal. Oh crap, well I've already done that. So let me go back and redo this. All right, so I'm going to do what I'm told. Look at that. That is totally not a horizontal line. Okay, so placement of line 6, complete the sketch. Enforce a parallel constraint with line 5, and enforce a parallel constraint with line 3. Okay, so it looks like we're just kind of supposed to make the rest of this and be terrible at it. So I'm going to go, uh, uh, and then finish up like that. Okay, wow. So, and that's not like the shape that we had earlier, but we're going to use our dimensional constraints to try to make it work. So, how are we going to make this work? I think let's go ahead and add some constraints. I want this line, so I'm going to click horizontal. I want this line to be horizontal. I really do. Okay, I do not want this line to be horizontal or vertical. I want it to be at like a 45-degree angle. So I think the best way to make those at 45-degree angles is to use the perpendicular approach. So I'm going to make this line and this line perpendicular to each other, and it will make a 90-degree relationship between each other. I can drag that line down a little bit. There we go. Okay. Looks like we need to enforce parallel constraints as well. So I'm going to make these two lines parallel to each other here and here. I'm also going to make these two lines parallel to each other here and here. And let's see here, what else can I do? Connect the endpoints between line 1 and line 9. And I think that we are good to go. All right. Um, let's see here. What other constraints? Now, I know this one over here was not that way, so I need to make that one vertical. So I'm going to click the vertical constraint, and I'm going to make it vertical like that. Okay. I can move these points down to where they're going to like semi-line up with each other. And that should create some kind. And I can move this line over here. The actual lengths of the line aren't constrained yet, but the geometry of the sketches is starting to become constrained. So if I hit show constraints, I have quite a few already put in. And to make my life, I guess, a little bit easier, I could put parallel constraints here. And I could put parallel constraints here just to make sure that it's not really going to go anywhere. And I could make these two parallel to each other as well. So I just keep adding more and more constraints so that whenever they move how I want them to move. So if these move up, then they're also going to move up kind of together with each other. Okay, let's see here. It says, now once we have all of these constraints done with it, we're going to finish the sketch. And I think from here, we're going to be adding constraints inside. Oh, I think I already totally did that. So step 17, 18, 19, and 20 are the ones to where we added the constraints in. So like whenever I stopped reading and I was like, I just want to make this look pretty, that was steps 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. So 21 says to create a quick sketch of the profile and show the constraints you added. They want you to draw out what the symbols are. It would help your brain to remember and memorize what the symbols are if you do it like that. And then for step 22, it does something that we have not done yet. We probably, because my shape isn't exactly like what it needs to be over here, because if I look at number 22, let me scroll down there, this looks like it's a lot cleaner than what's going on here. So I need, in order for my sketch to not look like cattywampus, I'm going to have to use the equal constraint. So the equal constraint means that certain side lengths should be equal to each other. Like, for example, this side length and this side length, if I click on them, they will become equal to each other, which I think is probably a really good idea. This line and this line probably need to be equal to each other. Yeah, that's looking a lot better already. Okay, and then from there, if I move these around, those lengths will automatically be equal to each other, which is nice. So I can move this up. I can move this down. And I can also use the equal constraint with these as well, because it doesn't look like those two lines are exactly in the middle with each other. So I'm going to hit equal, and those two links should kind of match up. Now this looks like a very nice symmetric object. Now I'm ready for number 23. It says to make a construction line. Oops, sorry, that's 22. My bad. So we want to use a construction line to create a vertical line through midpoints of 1 and 6. We will later use this construction line as a line of symmetry. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a line. So I'm going to click the line button. I'm going to go to the middle. The good news about Onshape is that it does snap in the halfway grids, although I did pull a really big dumb and I made these two parts down here parts of two separate lines. Oops. That's probably not the smartest thing to do, to be honest. You wanted that thing down the bottom one line. If you can get rid of that vertex by like dissolving it or something, that would probably be the best thing to do. So I'm going to see if I can, if I delete this sketch entity, I'm going to see if I can, maybe if I just move it all the way over here. Ooh, okay, there we go. So I have gotten rid of that one, and I probably wanted to do that. I'm going to right click on this line and I'm going to click construction to make it a construction line, and it'll make this nice little dashed line through the middle. Let's see here. We can move the cursor along line 1 until you see the midpoint symbol appear. Click and place the endpoint line coincident with the midpoint line 1. Move the cursor up along line 6 until the midpoint symbol appears. Place the second endpoint of the line coincident with the midpoint of line 6. Add a vertical constraint to the construction line if one does not already exist. Okay, well, I don't think there's a vertical constraint on it, so why don't we go ahead and put one on there? It may have already put it on there and I don't know, so let's find out. Looks like we're okay. All right, fix the midpoint of line 1 to the origin of the sketch plane. Because the origin is always fixed in place on the sketch plane, you only need to add a coincident constraint between the midpoint of line 1 and the origin. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're kind of to the right here. We're going to fix that by going and clicking the coincident constraint, and we're going to click on the midpoint, and then we're going to click on the origin, if you can get your mouse on it. And that should take your sketch, and it's going to move it in place. I may have to do some rearranging here because it looks like my constraints are working a little bit too well. I'm going to move this, and then I'm going to move this up, this down, this all around. Oh no. Let's see here. Well, these are perpendicular to each other. I might have over-constrained my sketch. So tell you what, I'm just going to click on this sketch and I'm going to show constraints. I'm going to right-click on this and I'm going to delete my constraint. Or I'm just going to single-click on it, backspace. I don't need you guys to be parallel and equal to each other if you're going to be like that. So maybe I need to get rid of the equal constraint as well too. Or one of these constraints needs to go away, and I've already like tied myself around way too much on this. So maybe if I click on this and flip it, there we go. And click on the line and just flip it over. That will seem to fix us okay. And that's a good thing because that was kind of hurting my brain a little bit. There we go. Okay, I'm going to turn off show constraints again. Now, let's see. What does it want us to do now? We've put it on there. Draw a circle on your sketch as shown below. The center of the circle should meet the following constraints. On a vertical line through the intersection of lines 3 and 4 and tangent to a horizontal line through the midpoint of line 2. Okay, so I think that means that we're going to make some construction lines. We're going to make a circle, and you can kind of cheat on the circle part and start off at this point here and kind of trace your way down. That'll add a vertical constraint. But we're also going to need to make a construction line. So I'm going to make a line that's at the midpoint and goes this way. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to click construction because that's going to be our halfway point. And if I need it to be tangent, I'm going to click on the tangent constraint. I'm going to click on the circle and then I'm going to click on that. And it's going to move it into place. Okay. And let's see here, fully constraining a sketch. Basically, it's going to say to pull these around and check and see if your sketch is fully constrained. You should be able to, once you constrain it, it shouldn't be able to like do weird stuff. Like you should be able to move it a little bit, but you shouldn't be able to get it to like flat out break. Okay, and that means that your sketch is fully constrained. All right. And then whenever we get to part 3, we're going to talk about adding dimensional constraints. So we'll go ahead and keep this right here. I would save it. This is going to be what you're going to need a screenshot of is your shape that has been constrained. And I want you to click on the show constraints button so I can actually see the constraints that you put on it. Have a great day and we'll talk next time. Let's see if I can find the end.